In 1820, a celibate community in upstate New York accidentally invented the pharmaceutical industry. By 1860, they were the continent's largest herb supplier. Number 14 was their bestseller for 40 years. Number 3 was removed from medicine, not when it failed, but when someone patented a replacement. These are 25 Shaker remedies that built America's first herbal medicine industry. Number 25, the sealed paper packet, the invention that changed everything. Before the Shakers, buying dried herbs meant buying from a general store barrel where contents had sat open for months, adulterated with cheaper material of unknown potency. The Shakers dried herbs in dedicated lofts with controlled airflow, pressed them to standardized weight, sealed them in paper packets, and printed labels guaranteeing purity. Physicians began specifying Shaker herbs in prescriptions because the results were more consistent than anything else available. That physician preference is the entire history of the modern supplement industry in compressed form. Number 24, rosewater for medicine and luxury. The Shakers at New Lebanon began distilling rosewater commercially by 1840. Used medicinally for eye inflammation and skin conditions, their version became the market standard because they controlled every step from planting through distillation. Flavonoids and terpene alcohols in rosewater have confirmed anti-inflammatory and antimicrobial properties. The New Lebanon community sold rosewater to Tiffany & Company in New York City, a product considered luxury enough for America's finest retailers, made by people who had renounced personal luxury as a theological principle. Number 23, lobelia for asthma, the most controversial plant in the Shaker pharmacopoeia. At controlled doses, it relaxed bronchial spasm and opened airways in asthmatic patients, an application backed by consistent clinical observation across decades of physician use. Lobeline, the active alkaloid, acts on nicotinic receptors, producing bronchodilation. Shaker communities sold it because the demand was real and the results were consistent. Physicians purchased it specifically because the Shakers had never been caught selling adulterated product, a trust that took decades to build. What that trust was eventually worth to the communities is a number that would surprise you. Number 22, sarsaparilla syrup, 40 years at the top. Thomas Corbett, a Shaker brother at Canterbury, New Hampshire, developed a sarsaparilla compound in the 1820s that became the single best-selling Shaker medicine for 4 consecutive decades. Marketed for blood purification and skin conditions, steroidal saponins in sarsaparilla have confirmed anti-inflammatory properties. The product sold for 40 years because something about it worked well enough that people kept coming back, which is the oldest clinical trial in existence. Number 21, wintergreen oil for pain. Aspirin before aspirin existed. The Shakers distilled methyl salicylate from wintergreen and sold it as a topical pain reliever in quantities that made it one of their most commercially significant products. Methyl salicylate converts to salicylic acid in the body, producing the same anti-inflammatory effect as the pharmaceutical Bayer would not synthesize for another 50 years. Shaker wintergreen oil appeared in physician supply catalogs alongside pharmaceutical preparations because physicians found it clinically equivalent to imported preparations at a fraction of the cost. Bayer knew this when they launched aspirin. They never mentioned it. Number 20, poplar bark for fever. Liriodendron tulipifera, tulip poplar, provided the Shakers with a fever and rheumatism medicine, growing abundantly on their New England landholdings without cultivation. The inner bark contained liriodendron and compounds with confirmed anti-inflammatory and antipyretic properties. Shaker herb catalogs from the 1850s listed poplar bark as a standard stock item for physicians treating fever. Bark was always harvested from fallen timber rather than living trees, a conservation practice born not from idealism, but from commercial logic. Overharvesting would destroy the supply chain their entire model depended on. Number 19. Agrimony for liver and digestion. The tall herb with small yellow flowers on a spike bridged European and American botanical traditions in every Shaker garden. Agrimony provided tannins and flavonoids with confirmed astringent and anti-inflammatory properties. Shaker physician brothers, who treated community members with agrimony for liver complaints, were applying the same plant to the same conditions for which European apothecaries had prescribed it for 3 centuries. That continuity of use across cultures and across time is its own form of clinical evidence. Number 18. Thoroughwort for fever. Eupatorium perfoliatum, boneset, was harvested from wild stands on Shaker landholdings and packed into sealed packets for physician purchasers. Sesquiterpene lactones and boneset have confirmed immunostimulant and anti-inflammatory properties. The Shaker communities supplied physicians with a product whose pharmacological activity was real, consistently prepared, and reliably available. And in a market where reliable availability was itself a competitive advantage. European importers could not match the combination of quality, consistency, and price. Here is what the Shaker herbal enterprise actually invented. Not the remedies. Most were inherited from European and indigenous traditions. What the Shakers invented was the supply chain. Standardized cultivation, controlled drying, consistent packaging, printed labels with quality guarantees, mail-order fulfillment, commercial distillation at scale. They developed fluid extract production using alcohol percolation themselves. Every infrastructure element that modern pharmaceutical distribution takes for granted was invented or first implemented at commercial scale by these communities between 1820 and 1880. The industry built on it forgot to mention where it came from. Number 17. Nervin powder for anxiety. The Shakers developed proprietary formulations combining skullcap with calming herbs into standardized powders that physicians could prescribe with confidence in the dose. Scutelarane and bacalin from skullcap, combined with other GABA-modulating compounds, produced calming effects that made these preparations reliable sellers across decades. The word nervin entered American medical vocabulary specifically through the botanical medicine tradition, and the Shakers packaged it in a form that gave it pharmaceutical legitimacy, a word nobody in 1840 was using, but a concept every physician purchasing from Shaker catalogs understood perfectly. Number 16. Sweet birch oil for rheumatism. Betula lenta, sweet birch, whose twigs smell unmistakably of wintergreen when broken, was the Shaker source for birch oil, a companion product to wintergreen oil in their catalog. Both contain methyl salicylate from different botanical sources. Offering both was product differentiation that a modern pharmaceutical marketer would recognize immediately. They share the same pharmacological mechanism, yet have different aromatic profiles and regional availability patterns, and were packaged identically with a quality guarantee. The sophistication of that commercial distinction, made in the 1840s, is the part of the Shaker story nobody talks about. Number 15. Columbo root as digestive tonic. Procera caroliniensis, American Columbo, was the domestic substitute for imported African Columbo root, and the Shakers were the primary commercial suppliers of the American version. Extremely bitter compounds in the root stimulate gastric secretion, bile production, and digestive enzyme activity through a mechanism that modern pharmacology has confirmed. Shaker catalogs explicitly marketed it as equivalent to the imported product at lower cost, giving physicians a clear financial argument for switching suppliers. The business model was sophisticated enough to displace a century-old import trade. The product earned that displacement. Number 14. Shaker extract of roots, the product that defined them. This is the one that was their best seller for 40 consecutive years. A standardized compound tonic for fatigue, digestive sluggishness, and joint aches, sold under various names at different communities. but sharing a formulation that families and physicians found reliable across seasons and years. The standardization that made them reliable was the shaker innovation that every pharmaceutical company building standardized extracts today is still working from. The category they created is now a multi-billion-dollar global industry. The communities that invented it received none of the royalties. Here's the number that frames everything else. At the peak of the shaker commercial herb operation in the 1850s and 1860s, the communities employed hundreds of people in what amounted to a vertically integrated pharmaceutical manufacturing operation, governed by theological principles that prohibited personal profit and mandated honesty in all commercial dealings. No investor pressure, no quarterly earnings to manage. The quality guarantee that made shaker herbs the physician's preferred supply was credible precisely because the people making it had no financial incentive to compromise it. Modern pharmaceutical regulation is still trying to replicate that. Number 13. Peppermint oil, the essential oil that became an industry. The New Lebanon community began distilling peppermint at commercial scale in the 1820s, using copper stills of their own design. By 1850, they were supplying the majority of the American market. Menthol content was higher and more consistent than any imported product because the shakers controlled cultivation, harvest timing, and distillation parameters at the same time. Modern peppermint oil production in Indiana and the Pacific Northwest traces its American commercial origin to those New Lebanon copper stills. The descendants of that operation are worth hundreds of millions of dollars today. Number 12. Spearmint oil for digestion and children. Where peppermint served adult applications, spearmint was cultivated and distilled specifically for digestive complaints and for preparations intended for children, where the lower menthol content made it safer and more palatable. Shaker commercial catalogs distinguish between the two with clinical precision, listing specific applications and noting the dosage differences appropriate to different active compound concentrations. That product differentiation within a single botanical family, marketing two related species for distinct clinical applications based on their different chemistry, was pharmaceutical sophistication applied to herbal medicine a full century before regulatory frameworks required it. Number 11. Wild carrot seed for kidney complaints. Daucus carota harvested from shaker meadows and sold dried specifically for kidney and urinary complaints. The seeds contain volatile oils with confirmed diuretic properties that modern pharmacology has since validated. Shaker physician brothers who prescribed wild carrot seed preparations for kidney complaints were applying a plant whose mechanism was real and whose results were consistent enough to keep it in shaker catalogs for decades. The seeds also carried properties that the tradition understood, and their catalogs communicated with notable restraint, which itself says something about how seriously the communities took accuracy. Number 10. Motherwort for heart palpitations. Leonuris cardiaca, the heart herb, appeared in shaker medicinal gardens because the cardiac applications from European herbal medicine transferred directly to American patients. Leonurine, the primary alkaloid, has confirmed negative chronotropic effects. It slows the heart rate through calcium channel modulation. A 2011 review in the journal Phytochemistry validated the traditional use for palpitations and mild arrhythmia. The shaker garden plant was heart medicine, supported by a mechanism that researchers would not identify for another century and a half. The communities had been right about the application the entire time. Number 9. Lemon balm for the community's emotional health. Melissa officinalis appeared in every shaker medicinal garden, specifically for the mental and emotional complaints that celibate communal life inevitably produced. The loneliness, the grief, and the anxiety of a demanding spiritual practice. Rosmarinic acid in lemon balm inhibits the enzyme that breaks down GABA, increasing the brain's primary calming neurotransmitter without sedating. Shaker sisters who prepared lemon balm tea for community members struggling with anxiety were providing a pharmacologically appropriate intervention for conditions that conventional 19th century medicine had almost nothing to offer. The preparation was free. It grew outside the kitchen door. Number 8. Skullcap for nerves and convulsions. Scutellaria lateriflora was cultivated by Shaker communities after physician demand outstripped what wild harvest could supply. What they discovered changed how they managed every subsequently cultivated plant. Cultivated skullcap produced more consistent alkaloid levels than wild harvested material, foreshadowing the controlled cultivation practices that pharmaceutical companies would adopt a full century later to ensure consistent active compound content. Bicolin and Scutellaria have confirmed GABA modulating activity. Shaker physician brothers used it for epileptic convulsions and nervous exhaustion. Both applications entirely consistent with the pharmacology that modern research eventually confirmed. Number 7. Sweet fern for skin and wounds. Comptonia peregrina, the aromatic shrub of sandy northeastern soils, served Shaker communities as a wound and skin medicine that never reached commercial scale but earned its place through consistent internal use across all the communities. Leaves bruised against poison ivy rash and insect stings reduced inflammation through tannins and volatile compounds, with confirmed anti-inflammatory and anti-pruritic activity. Sweet fern tea addressed diarrhea through the same astringent tannin mechanism as oak bark. It was a remedy the Shakers made no money from because they kept it for themselves. Number 6. Meadow sweet, the aspirin the Shakers grew before aspirin existed. Filipendula ulmaria, cultivated in Shaker gardens for fever and pain, contains the same salicylate chemistry Bayer would synthesize into aspirin and patent it in 1897. The stomach protective tannins in meadowsweet that prevent the gastric irritation of pharmaceutical aspirin were present in the Shaker preparation and absent from the Bayer product. The Shakers were dispensing a more pharmacologically complete version of aspirin than the one that became the global standard, grown in gardens they were tending before aspirin's active compound had been isolated by anyone. Number 5. Fluid extract technology, the Shaker pharmaceutical innovation. The Shakers developed fluid extract preparation. They used alcohol percolation to produce a concentrated botanical extract in liquid form. And they did this at commercial scale before any pharmaceutical company had systematized the process. A fluid extract specified the ratio of plant material to final extract volume, allowing physicians to calculate doses with the same precision they applied to pharmaceuticals. When the pharmaceutical industry formally adopted fluid extract technology in the 1880s, they were adopting a process the Shaker communities had been using commercially for 30 years. The process became standard. The origin was not mentioned. Number 4. Anise and fennel oil for infant colic. The Shakers distilled anise and fennel at commercial scale and sold the essential oils both directly and as ingredients in compound preparations. Both contain anethol, with confirmed antispasmodic activity in gastrointestinal smooth muscle. That is the mechanism that gripewater and infant colic preparations still exploit today. Physician purchasers specified Shaker anise oil because the consistent anethol content made dosing predictable across batches. The infant colic preparation sold in every pharmacy today contains the same active compound the Shakers were distilling in the 1840s. The compound has not changed. The price has. Number 3. Black cohosh, removed not because it failed. Shaker communities grew and sold black cohosh for menopausal symptoms and menstrual complaints for decades, with consistent physician repeat orders that constituted longitudinal real-world evidence no clinical trial could generate retroactively. When pharmaceutical hormone therapy became available mid-century, black cohosh was not removed because clinical observation found it wanting. It was displaced because hormone therapy was patentable and black cohosh was not. Germany's Commission E eventually approved black cohosh for menopausal symptoms, based on the same accumulated evidence that Shaker physician purchasers had been acting on since the 1850s. What took the rest of the world a century to confirm, the Shakers already knew. Number 2, the Shaker Herb Catalog, the document that created an industry. The printed catalogs distributed to physicians beginning in the 1830s listed herbs by botanical and common name, described therapeutic applications, specified the preparation form available, stated prices, and included guaranteed delivery timelines. Shaker catalogs were deliberately conservative in their therapeutic descriptions, listing only established uses, never speculative ones, because their commercial model depended on physician trust. And physician trust depended on accuracy. The regulatory principle that pharmaceutical advertising must be accurate and not misleading traces its practical commercial origin to standards that Shaker Herb marketing set before any government body thought to require it. Number 1, the quality guarantee, the principle that made everything else possible. The single most important Shaker contribution to American medicine was not a plant, not a preparation, and not a catalog. It was a promise. The sealed packet with the printed label was a guarantee that the contents were what the label said, prepared to the standard described, and free from the adulteration that characterized everything else on the market. That guarantee was credible because the Shaker communities staked their commercial reputation on it across decades, and because their institutional structure, communal ownership, shared labor, and shared accountability made enforcing it possible in ways a profit-driven competitor found economically difficult. The pharmaceutical industry that inherited the Shaker infrastructure kept the technology and the supply chain, but it replaced the guarantee with a regulatory framework that tries, imperfectly, to replicate what those communities maintained as a matter of shared faith. 25 remedies and one principle. The supplements on every pharmacy shelf today, packaged in standardized doses with printed labels guaranteeing purity, are a Shaker invention. They received none of the credit. Walk into any health food store this week and read the label on whatever is nearest to you. It was made possible by perfectionists in upstate New York who believed honesty in commerce was a form of worship. Subscribe to Forgotten American Ways.